Hello, this is Professor Weissman's PowerPoint presentation designed to teach the remainder of the criminal justice process course remotely. It can be accessed on Blackboard and on YouTube at Professor Weissman's CJ Courses channel. This is Unit 4, and we will cover pretrial identification techniques used by law enforcement. In Unit 4, we will be looking at two types of pretrial identification of suspects methods, lineups and photo arrays, and also trial identification of defendants. There are two broad categories of identification of suspects and defendants, pretrial and trial. Pretrial identifications fall into four main categories: lineups, show-ups, photo arrays, also known as PHOTOPACKS, and composite sketches. We will be looking at lineups and photo arrays. Trial identifications fall into only one category, which is an in-court identification. For example, the witness on the stand points to the defendant and states while pointing, "That's the man who did it." Generally, pretrial identifications, including lineups and photo arrays, are inadmissible at trial if the procedure is found by the court to be unnecessarily suggestive. The objection to the use of such pretrial identification procedures at trial by a defendant, however, needs to be made at a pretrial suppression hearing, otherwise it will be waived. There is an infamous story of 22-year-old Jerry Miller, who is charged with robbing, kidnapping, and raping a woman. Two witnesses identified Miller in a police lineup as the perpetrator, although the victim herself was a little bit more hesitant at the trial. Nevertheless, Miller was convicted, served 24 years in prison, and was released on parole as a registered sex offender. Years later, semen taken from the victim's clothing was analyzed. The DNA from the sample was shown not to have come from Miller. The DNA sample was entered into CODIS, which is the FBI's convicted offender database, and another man was identified. Eventually, Miller was exonerated. A link to CODIS is set forth on the slide. A lineup is a procedure where police officers present at least 5, but usually 6 people of similar size, race, hair color, eye color, etc., to a witness, and then ask the witness to identify the person they believe is the perpetrator. There are two forms or types of lineups: simultaneous and sequential. The most common lineup procedure used by law enforcement is the simultaneous lineup, which is when the witness views all the people, or photos in the case of a photo array identification procedure, at the same time. In a sequential lineup, people or photographs are presented to the witness one at a time, that is, in sequence. But which method is better? A problem associated with simultaneous lineups is that when the perpetrator is not present in the lineup panel, the witness sometimes chooses the lineup filler who most closely resembles the perpetrator, but obviously is not the perpetrator him or herself. During sequential lineups, a witness must decide about each lineup member before moving on to the next, which is referred to as the use of absolute judgment. That is, the witness compares each person to their memory of what the offender looked like, not comparing each person or photo to the other persons or photos. Let's look at some suggested guidelines for lineup procedures. Lineups should have at least 5, but generally 6 people. Participants should be of the same sex, race, and approximately of the same age. Their personal characteristics should be close. For example, approximately same weight, hair color, and eye color. Participants should wear the same type of clothing. The accused should be placed in the lineup randomly so as not to be suggestive. Persons who are known to the witness should not be in the lineup. 2 or more witnesses should view the lineup separately. Each participant should receive the same instructions. Photographs of the lineup procedure should be taken so that it can later be reviewed for fairness. Should choose non-suspect fillers that fit the witness's description and that minimize any suggestiveness that might point toward a particular suspect. Double-blind procedures should be used. That is, if the lineup administrator knows who the suspect is, he or she might inadvertently give the witness some verbal or nonverbal cue as to the identity of the suspect and in essence steer them. In a double-blind lineup, neither the administrator nor the witness knows the identity of the suspect, and so the administrator cannot influence the witness in any way. Witnesses should be instructed that the real perpetrator may or may not be present, and that the administrator does not know which person is the suspect. The suspects and fillers should be presented sequentially, one at a time, rather than simultaneously, all at once. This encourages absolute judgments of each person presented, as mentioned before. Gauge eyewitness confidence in their identification immediately following the identification of the person in the panel. For example, was the witness absolutely positive in their identification, or were they hesitant or tentative in their decision? And lastly, should avoid multiple identification procedures in which a witness views the same suspect more than once. Suggestiveness at lineups, which might get the procedure thrown out during a pre-trial motion, can include that the defendant is the only one with a visible, distinguishing facial or other features, such as a mustache, a beard, a scar, a tattoo. The defendant is visibly taller or shorter than the other participants. The defendant has lighter or darker skin than the other participants. The defendant is the only one dressed in clothing similar to that worn by the alleged perpetrator. The defendant is the only one handcuffed. More than one suspect is displayed in the same lineup. A second witness is allowed to see the first witness's reaction to the lineup before the second witness views it, thereby potentially influencing them. A police officer or administrator at the lineup might say, "We think we've got the man who did it," or words to that effect, before the witness even views the lineup. Let's now turn to PHOTOPACKS or photo arrays. A witness viewing a photo array is similar to that witness viewing a lineup. The array is drawn when the officer has a suspect in mind and wants to show the photo to the victim or witness, but the manner in which the officer does so cannot be suggestive. Like the lineup, the array should be double-blind and sequential for a more accurate response. An identification, known as a hit, will then lead to a lineup. Suggestiveness in PHOTOPACKS can include the defendant's photo is in color and the others are in black and white, or vice versa. The defendant's photo alone reveals a particular identifying characteristic. The defendant's photo differs in size from the other photographs. the defendant's photo is placed in more than one photo pack shown to the same witness. The police officer conducting the photo pack makes a suggestive remark to the witness.